So this is Gur Tsabar. Gur, do you just want to explain? You come from the Movement Media Hub.
Yeah.
Would you just like to give people a bit of a refresher on what the Movement Media Hub is and what some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, happy to. The Movement Media Hub is actually the equivalent of a public relations, media relations agency for leftist social movements and organizations, grassroots organizations, primarily in Canada, but in North America, and now doing some work globally, actively right now supporting the global Samud flotilla. I'm running their press and media operations for the entire mission. But otherwise have been, basically supporting the pro-Palestine movement since October 2023, and then working with a bunch of other organizations as opportunities come up.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the literature for Movement Media Hub, you speak about how it seemed like as that moment was coming, and this Israel's war on Gaza really started to escalate, that there felt like there was a real gap and a need that was needed by some of the social movements that were going to be required in this moment. Yeah. So how has it been so far over the last couple of years of growing that into what it's become? And do you think that need and that gap is being filled to the extent that it needs to be?
Yeah, I think there's meaning. I think there are now multiple of us organizations that are trying to work with social organizations, social justice organizations and movements across Canada. So there are now a few different organizations that are doing that. But the need is consistent and it's real. Mainstream media, as you and I'm sure your community knows, is not built for grassroots organizations. It's not built for leftist movements. Quite the opposite. They are tools of the state. We spend as much time as we spend thinking about how the media ecosystem functions. We spend even more time thinking about how it dysfunctions, so that we're able to leverage that and really hack it every which possible way. So we spend time thinking about how it, misframes and misrepresents our organizations and our movements. How it gatekeeps information, how it is selective about what it covers and what it doesn't cover, and most definitely about how biased the entire system is from top to bottom. Just trying to be eyes wide open about the system we're dealing with and figuring out how to get stories told, because no matter whether we like it or not, it's still the primary, there's still the average Canadian still pays a lot of attention to mainstream media. And so the need is there both from the organizational level, but also from the average TV watcher or newspaper reader who we need to get in front of in order to make sure that our perspective is being shown.
Yeah, I would say it's more important than ever as well, because I think one thing that's been kind of interesting about this time is we're seeing this growing disconnect between the audiences for these kind of mainstream media organizations and like what their priorities and their values are, both in the media sphere and in the political sphere. And the more that this conflict has dragged on and the more horrors that people have been exposed to through social media, it has been, I think, a really jarring experience for people to realize, to turn on the news and the media and feel like they're getting a completely different version of reality that doesn't match up with what they're being shown. And it's clear, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu and representatives of the Israeli government are quite honest about the challenges that they're faced by the fact that people are using social media to actually get this kind of information. Is that something that you've noticed though in doing the work that you've been doing? Like the people are maybe a little bit more receptive to some of these narratives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's shocking, right? I mean, I think the discrepancy between what we know to be true because we're seeing it 24/7, 365 on our phone screens versus what we end up seeing on the evening news. The discrepancy right now could not be greater, and it's so clear that the mechanism, the media mechanism, the mainstream media mechanism is being highly controlled every which possible way. And I think I think people need to be open eyes about that, and we need to also be able to talk very freely about the fact that it's being heavily, heavily manipulated.
You just want to update us a little bit about the global Samud flotilla and the work that you've been doing with the flotilla?
Yeah, we are, almost, what's the date today? Today's the 13th. We are 1 month in to the mission. It left Barcelona on the 12th of April. Went to, had a great launch in Barcelona, went to then Italy to Sicily, where it met up with additional boats. And then following that departure is when the flotilla was intercepted and violently intercepted and raided way out of Israel's occupied Palestine, the jurisdiction that they would even theoretically have if it was a real state. So they were intercepted off the coast of Crete. We had 22 boats that were intercepted of the 55 that were sailing at the time. And we had 181 people abducted that night. So most of them were 179 of them were subsequently released into Greek custody. And then we had the two others, Saif Abukeshik and Tiago Avila, that were taken from international waters, literally abducted back to occupied Palestine. And they were held there for 10 days in detention, as political prisoners, hostages. They were interrogated, tortured, beaten, and finally released because of the global pressure that was created to release them. They both came back home. Saif came back home on this past Sunday, and Tiago came back home on Monday. And so today we announced our final. The entire fleet is in Marmaris, Turkey, and announced that it's continuing on with its mission to Gaza, and we'll be departing tomorrow for the final leg of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I have such huge respect for the activists that are part of these flotillas, and like this, the fact that they have backup like this, I feel is so important. One of the most radicalizing incidents for me was about Israel years ago now, was the Freedom Flotilla back in 2010, which was attacked. Yeah. And people were killed on board this flotilla, which I had been following at the time. And it was, I remember feeling not only just shocked at the level of violence, but the discrepancy in when this kind of violence is allowed, and when the international community will turn their heads and not say anything about it. And in this case as well, you had Canadian citizens that are part of this flotilla. Again, people that are putting themselves in harm's way, knowing exactly what kind of the consequences might happen.
Yes.
And the way that, like, if any other country was abducting people in international waters in this way, this would be this major international incident.
Yeah.
But then we have our own government that's looking the other way, or barely doing anything at all to really protect our own citizens that are engaged in this kind of activism. And I think that's the exact kind of thing that's causing people to kind of scratch their heads when they realize that there seems to be a sort of different playbook or a different set of rules that certain countries have to follow that we don't always follow through on.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, Israel is the main project of the Epstein class. So that's where, the Zionist Epstein class is focusing its attention, and it is doing everything in its power, especially across Western states, to support this reality. I mean, the fact that Israeli Navy was allowed 1,000 kilometers away from occupied Palestine to abduct people in international waters off the coast of Crete means that occupation has now been extended from Gaza to, a good portion of the Mediterranean. They're now able to roam freely there. So yeah, it's shocking, but on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also great that we're all now waking up, I think, in a very meaningful way, in a very material way, to the reality that has surrounded us for the past 7 decades. But that's, the masks are off every which possible way on our world, the world we live in, the institutions that, that we engage with. It's all coming down. That's the beauty of it, and that's one of the things that I think even the flotilla has done so successfully so far, without even reaching the shores of Gaza, is exposed all this complicity. The fact that Israel was able to abduct 1,000, intercept and abduct folks 1,000 kilometers away from Gaza, was, they didn't act alone. They had they had the full support of European governments, especially Greece. So yeah, it's pretty nuts. And to your point, very much feel the same way about the activists that are putting their bodies on the line on the boats.
Yeah, because they're objectively putting themselves in harm's way. Especially not only just in terms of the history of these activists being attacked and shot at and killed in some cases, but some of the disturbing stories that are still coming out about Israeli prisons that people are subjecting themselves to.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. Another thing that's happening in Canada right now, and I think this really also highlights this kind of asymmetry in terms of like where these priorities are, like when we're concerned about language that might make people uncomfortable or feel unsafe, and when we crack down on it and when we don't. And I'm referring to this anti-Zionism conference that's happening in Canada. Which is headlined by Ben Shapiro, obviously.
Yeah.
Of course, Jesse Brown has been a widely publicized person that's participating in this as well. And he's been going on this kind of, offensive over the last couple of years about kind of framing the anti-Zionist movement in this country as being this like hate movement, and really like using all the resources at his disposal, much to what seems like the displeasure of the actual people that have worked in his media organization that have built it up into what it is. But I do think this is interesting, though, especially when you talk about Ben Shapiro. And, as some people may know, Ben Shapiro is one of the primary conservative media influencers that was read and viewed and listened to by Alexandre Bissonnette, who in 2017 killed 6 people in a mosque in Quebec City. And partially because he had all kinds of ideas that he was getting from these conservative media influencers like Ben Shapiro. And we've had so much talk over the last couple of years about, places of worship, and do people deserve to feel safe and do they not deserve to? I always, every single time, bring up the Mount Sinai Spider-Man incident.
Oh, yes.
And about how unsafe that made people feel. And I think I think that's another thing that's shocking to me, the fact that like this kind of conference is kind of framed as being this kind of benign thing it's part of this important discussion about anti-Zionism and hate speech and all this stuff, when you can make this direct link between the ideas that are on display here and actual violence against people that have taken place in religious places of worship in this country. And when we have these values to protect these kinds of people's freedom of religion and protect these places, versus when we kind of look the other way. And this seems to be another case for me that really highlights this asymmetry.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's the, I call it the Jewish feelings, but it should probably be called the Zionist Jewish feelings industrial complex.
Yes.
And that has, none of that happens by accident. The same with like the anti-Semitism industrial complex. There has, the Israeli state and the Israeli state apparati, whatever you call it, across the globe, have spent the past 7 decades putting these structures in place so that they're narrative structures. They're meant to support a certain narrative. And that core narrative is that Israel is the place for the Jews, and no one can criticize Israel. And if you criticize Israel, you are anti-Semitic, which is not what anti-Semitism actually is. But everything has been built around those concepts, and that includes very much word policing and it includes very much the victimization narrative of Jews, who cry at the first, and I'll say Zionist Jews just to be specific, who cry at the sight of a Palestinian flag, or panic because they hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or don't like the way you're talking about apartheid. None of that is accidental. It's been entirely programmed, both within the broader Jewish community, Zionist community, and as a result, also everyone else who's trying to talk about this topic. Everyone has been made to feel like they can't talk about this topic, and if they do it wrong, they're going to be labeled anti-Semitic. So it's all bogus. It's all disgusting. It's all vile as fuck. I don't know how else to say it. I actually wrote I have a Patreon called the 8 Anti-Zionists, and I wrote a post exactly about this this past week. The Jewish Feelings Industrial Complex, and just went to town on all the things that people have been labeled anti-Semitic for, and try to call bullshit on all of it.
Yeah, and it seems like the people that would promote this idea of the criticism of Israel equaling anti-Semitism, a lot of the time, like when you look into it, they'll be careful to try and equivocate and say like, oh no, of course you can criticize Israel and that's not anti-Semitic as long as it's treated the same
X,
as
Y,
every
and
other
Z.
country, right? They kind of give themselves some wiggle room to suggest that that's not the case. But I do feel like if any other country around the world was engaging in this level of like open depravity, we would be talking about it, and it wouldn't be controversial to talk
100%.
about. It would be the least controversial thing ever to speak about it this way. And that's ultimately what it comes
100%.
down to. They demand this ability to be treated the same as every other country, but no other country would be able to engage in this level of inhuman violence, and to suggest that like any criticism of that is contributing to this phenomenon, this scary phenomenon leading into anti-Jewish racism or any of these like really horrifying like historical trends.
Yeah. No, agreed. It's the violence. There's no bottom. I don't know how else to say it. There's no bottom to what we're witnessing. Every day we wake up and we see something else that the Israeli state or an Israeli soldier has done, and I'm just like, it's chin to the floor every single time. And there's no more language left to describe the disgust and to describe the depravity. It's like we keep using these same words, but it's beyond that.
Yeah,
it's multiplied gazillions of times around that.
How do you kind of square the circle? Because like I think you could make the case that Israel's actions have kind of fed into this an actual what you could describe as a rise in like anti-Semitic sentiment or something like that.
100%.
You see this a lot on the right,
100%,
and obviously it becomes tricky to talk about when it's been weaponized in this way.
Yeah.
But how is that something? How have you come to think about that? Because like that as a phenomenon that should be maybe observed and talked about and discussed, but also while avoiding this pratfalls of like feeding into this kind of like this narrative of criticism of this like geopolitical entity and the violence that we're all seeing. And how do you separate these two things?
So one, by being very clear that two sides of the same coin. One is that Israel is a genocidal state doing genocidal things, and 100% needs to be criticized for that. Two, and the flip side is realizing that the term anti-Semitism, because it has been conflated with criticism of Israel by the pro-Israel Zionist lobby and the state, the term anti-Semitism means nothing today. It's almost a badge of honor at this point to be called anti-Semitic, because it means that you're criticizing Israel. That's what it's become to mean. So I'm now at the point where I'm trying to get people to call bullshit anytime they're called anti-Semitic, unless they have real hatred of Jews for being Jews in their heart. At which point, go check yourself if you're anti-Semitic. But yeah, it's a fucked up world, because to your point, they've actually made the world so much less safer for Jews by conflating the concepts, because now, for sure, every time Israel goes crazy, which has been nonstop for the past 77 years, and certainly for the past 3 years, real anti-Semitism rises, and rightfully so, right? Because you're going to be mad because the perpetrators of the crimes are mostly Jewish people who live in Israel. And it's really shitty what Israel and the lobby has done in the name of keeping this disgusting concept of this bullshit state of Israel alive.
Yeah, and it also just seems to me that a lot of what we're seeing right now, like we talked about this discrepancy between what our media class is talking about, our political class is talking about, versus the observable reality for other people.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that it kind of feeds into a lot of these like traditional anti-Semitic conspiracies that people have had about Jewish people and the media and politics. When people look at the Canadian government turning its head when Canadian citizens are being abducted and brought to Israeli prisons, and we have this nonstop, hand-wringing about anti-Semitism and people's feelings of safety and how we need to protect that, while we also have this like completely normalized Islamophobia, completely normalized racism against South Asian people, completely normalized racism against Indigenous people. We have whole parties emerging in this country that are based on anti-Indigenous racism. Yes. And we don't want to have these same conversations about that. No. And I think that absolutely does feed into these ideas that people have. Or you have the things like Bill C9 as well in Canada, which I know you've done a lot of work on as well. Again, trying to protect these specific institutions who are engaging in, even when they're engaging in political activity, selling or auctioning off land in these disputed or occupied territories. And we have the Canadian government using the language of hate speech and freedom of religion to protect this overtly political activity, something that's not being extended to any other group that might, appreciate the same kind of level of protection from the government. But that's the question, though. Do you think that's kind of feeding into people's preconceived ideas or notions that they have about the way our government operates or our media operates?
Yeah, 100%. And look, I mean, one thing we need to also be really eyes wide open about is that Zionism, while Zionism is much bigger than to the Jewish people, right? There are more Christian Zionists gazillions more Christian Zionists on the planet than there are Jewish Zionists. The Christian Zionist enterprise is really what's funding and driving all of this. That doesn't change the fact that it is largely Jewish Zionists that are currently genociding Palestinians in Gaza. So all of which is to say that yes, the answer to your question is yes. All of this is driving the belief in the tropes that Jews control the media and whatever other associated tropes, because it's all interconnected under the Zionist banner. But just to be, to be eyes wide open and clear about it, there is an entire Christian Zionist infrastructure that's driving really all of this. And it's that same infrastructure that caused Israel to become a state in the first place in 1948. But yes, I think everything that's happening and the way it's happening is absolutely having the effect of driving anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and so we've talked a little bit about this discrepancy that we're seeing in the media. One phenomenon that I've been observing lately, and we're seeing this more in America. I don't know if there's Canadian examples that we could hold up as being similar, but we're seeing a little bit of a political realignment happening in the conservative movement in America, where criticism of Israel all of a sudden is becoming a lot more prominent among in certain wings of the conservative movement.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you're seeing a lot
Tucker.
of discourse about this lately. I think Tucker Carlson has been a major
Yeah.
figure here. People like Candace Owens,
Yes.
former politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene are
Yes.
being talked about in this way. I'm just wondering, like, what do you make of that? And there's all this kind of question of like, should there be some kind of alliance between kind of people on the left, anti-Zionists, and these right-wing people,
Yeah.
which I think is maybe a little bit of an inaccurate way of thinking about this.
Yeah. Agreed.
Because I don't really trust or like a lot of these people or believe in that they have actually good values or intentions. At the same time, it feels like a little bit like there is an opportunity right now to be speaking to larger groups of people about this that maybe would never have been receptive to these kinds of ideas in the past. So I'm just wondering, like, what you make about this realignment that's going on and how you're thinking about this kind of movement in the right, especially to incorporate more of this kind of criticism.
Yeah, it's a shocking reality. We live in a totally upside down world. You have a reality where Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson are on the same side, effectively, in many ways, as the pro-Palestine movement, and are doing more for the pro-Palestine movement than anyone in the Democratic Party. That alone is a shocking reality. But yeah, to your point, they're not good. They're not good partners. They are. Each and every one of them are racist, xenophobic, and they're all, for the most part, coming at it from like an America First perspective, and making really logical arguments from an America First perspective, as in like, why in the world are we sending billions and billions and billions of our hard-earned tax dollars to support this thing way out there that doesn't benefit us materially at all. So yeah, I think it's a really complicated reality, but there are some synergies that I do think need to be explored, again, eyes wide open, in terms of who it is we're dealing with and the limits of that. Because I don't totally trust what their end goals are. But I do, we'll take whatever, if they want to speak up on behalf of the U.S. not sending any more money to Israel, we'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's been helpful for me as a way to think about this and talk about it as well is not so much that we need to be making partnerships with the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world.
Right.
But more just like this represents a massive failure of the liberal progressive side to
100%.
open up this lane for people like Tucker Carlson to come across as these reasonable moralists.
Yes.
And there's plenty of people both in Canada and the United States from this progressive tradition that have really tried to speak up and tried to be advocates for Palestine or criticize Israel, but they're also caught in this system where their party leadership are fully on board with continuing to support and promote this project, and they seem kind of like really unwilling or unable to push back against that in any meaningful way. And that's allowed people like that, I think you could describe as being more cynical opportunists, to just say the things and to criticize their own party and to criticize Donald Trump. And that to me is the biggest failure right now. The fact that opportunity has been given to these kind of somewhat ghoulish people to come across as being reasonable and sound on this issue. Does that get the same sense?
Same sense, though. One thing I will say, like with Tucker Carlson, he's doing. I mean, the reality is he's doing a lot of good investigative reporting.
Yeah,
on a lot of tangential topics. I mean, even things like the 9/11 documentary and its potential connection to the Israeli state, to me has been really, really interesting. So,
or like pushing back on someone like Ted Cruz when they say, well, the Bible says we need to support Israel, and saying like, where does it say that in the Bible? And pushing back on this idea that the Israel that we understand it today, as it exists as this geopolitical entity, is somehow the same thing as what's described in this holy book that was written thousands of years ago.
That's right. Yeah. No. So offering a lot of really valuable commentary, but yeah, it's a big mind fuck in terms of. I mean, look, it's part and parcel for the world we're living in right now. Everything is upside down.
Yeah.
Nothing makes sense.
Well, now you're
Nothing
seeing
makes sense.
another one of these guys is Nick Kristof in the New York Times. I don't know
Yeah.
if you saw him. He's in the New York
His
Times.
piece.
Again, in the opinion section of the New York Times, but with like a heavily reported and investigated piece
Yeah.
about torture that's been going on and sexual abuse that's
Yes.
been going on in these Israeli
Political
prisons.
prisoners. Yeah.
And this is like this like neocon guy who
Yes.
spent his whole career being like a loyal servant for U.S. power and Israel throughout his
Yes.
career. And it's just remarkable, this shift that's going on. And then you have someone like Nick Kristof is being talked about as the new public enemy number one, and Nick Kristof is supporting Hamas now and all this stuff.
Yes.
It's just really strange. But like I said, I think that's my main takeaway is that yes, it's strange, and no, I don't really like or trust these people, but it's clear that there's a major shift going on.
Major
and that
shift.
represents that's like really historic in our lifetimes, which is something that can be capitalized on.
100%.
Yeah.
No, and I think now is the time when you're starting to see a lot of these neocons and liberal Zionists, and I think it's time. It's the time where they're just like they have to sort of you can no longer deny what's happening. It's become so blatantly obvious every which possible way. So I think. A lot of people, I think, are now finding themselves, there's that book that was written earlier on, Someday Everyone Will Have Been Against This.
Yeah.
I think that's the right title.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to reach that shifting point where people are starting to feel like they better be against this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, and the other thing, like approaching this from like an America first or a Canada first perspective, I understand that can be appealing to an audience, but I think one of the things that does do also is it creates a kind of whitewashing effect of the evils of these governments that have nothing to do with Israel, that have been doing evil things around the world since long before Israel ever existed.
Yeah.
And suggesting this
100%.
idea that America or Canada would be doing good things around the world, and of course would be spending tax dollars on their own citizens, were it not for this like foreign entity that's forcing them to do these other things. I don't think that's an accurate way of looking at this. But the Iran war is a great example of this. Like the whole global economy is now being held hostage, and gas prices are astronomical and don't seem like they're going back down anytime soon.
No.
You can try to imagine like the average like Trump supporter looking at that. And looking at a clip like what he said the other day when he said, I'm not even considering the average economic circumstance of the average American, and saying, why are we doing this? And and it's not hard to understand how someone like that could start getting some ideas about the Israeli government and Israeli influence over the U.S. government, and then they turn to people like Tucker Carlson and who have answers for these questions.
That's right.
That's the kind of dangerous thing at this moment. At the same time,
Yes.
Do you get the same impression?
It's the exact same impression. Yeah, no, it's that's exactly right. I think you've sketched that out exactly correctly. The chain of kind of the chain of operation, the order of operation is exactly that. I think $6 a gallon gas prices is going to wake up the base hardcore, and it's going to open all the eyes in terms of why this is all happening, and the average American and the average Canadian is going to get really upset about why we're supporting this, and they will then turn to the likes of Tucker. I think that makes perfect sense, and I think ideally we have other people that from other parties or other political leanings, less racist and less xenophobic, that can help fill the gap.
Yes. Well, and what do you make of Mark Carney? Because he's someone that came into power in this country, that all of a sudden just has this enormous popularity. I don't totally. I mean, I sort of understand why, but I don't know if his actual actions are matching up to the reasons why people supported him in the first place. Like his whole kind of elbows up campaign, kind of protecting this country and our sovereignty against America, and then immediately backing their war with Iran, even after they bombed a school filled with school children.
School children,
And, increasing Canadian military spending, a lot of which is going to be going to American defense companies.
Yeah.
It seems like a huge discrepancy, but people in this country don't seem to be wise to it quite yet.
Yeah.
But what do you make of Carney and in the short
Yeah.
time that he's been in power and as it relates to this situation and Canada's role here?
Yeah, no, I think it's obvious that he's currently pulling the rug over everyone. But I think the same thing. I think people will wake up. I do actually think the Iran war is going to be probably is the thing that's probably going to most materially wake people up, because it's going to, they were, and I want to caveat this because two things are existing at the same time. The Iranian government is a terrible entity that's doing terrible things to its own people. And they have been very strategic about how they fought Western powers, fought the US and fought Israel so far, much more strategic than either Israel or the US thought they were. And they are materially impacting the world financial system. And in a way that we're just now starting to see the early signs of how much impact, but it's going to be far greater than what we're seeing. They're effectively killing the petrodollar, which is what oil trade has been based on for the past, multiple decades. And I think the average Canadian is going to start feeling it in their pockets really, really soon. And then Mark Carney is going to look like, my hope in a very short amount of time, it'll be, again, the mask will come off very quickly. Right now, I think he has this kind of like grandfatherly feel that people have been really attracted to on the surface. But he's not going to be able to answer for why he's spending gazillions of dollars on defense while Canadian quality of life is about to shoot further and further downward at an exponential rate. So I'm actually optimistic that his bullshit reality, everything he represents, is going to become very clear very soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to position yourself as like the guy who's so experienced at the economics.
Yeah.
And then you immediately back a war with a few caveats that came later that drastically increases the cost of living for everybody.
Yeah. You also have the likes of. Oh, sorry, I was going to ask one more thing. You also have the likes of like Mamdani in New York, who I think is doing some really interesting things in terms of, and not that I'm not a Mamdani stan, but I think he's doing some really interesting things in terms of public services. And I think people are going to become very, the differences are going to become very stark very soon in terms of how government can and should work versus how it's actually working here.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And it's like, as we're seeing like in the Canadian left right now, there's hopefully a movement towards like promoting that kind of a vision for what the government can and should be doing. It's going to be a long kind of uphill battle in this country, but I'm glad that it's actually happening at least. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about Iran, because I guess that's from my position. I have a lot of sympathy for countries that are under siege in the way that Iran has been for decades, like since '79, basically. Yes. And I think these kind of siege conditions can feed into some of the behaviors that we then criticize about human rights or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I guess one thing, the thing that I always think about with Iran is that we're all so horrified and disgusted by Israelis' actions, and we see the Canadian government backing it, we see the United States government backing it, and the UK and Germany, and criticizing and criminalizing this kind of criticism and beating up protesters that are trying to, even including Jewish protesters, in the name of anti-Semitism. We see all these things that are happening in the West, just looking the other way while these horrifying crimes are committed.
100%.
Regardless of what we want to say about Iran is like funding the actual resistance against this kind of violence, which is necessary, I think. And as feckless and as incapable of stopping this as these Western governments have proven to be, the actual people that are doing the fighting back against this are filling a really important role in this moment. And I think we can't forget Iran's position in allowing these movements to continue to exist.
Yeah, but let me be very clear. 100%. They are the only form of resistance happening globally against empire, colonial empire. But I can also tell you, my partner's Iranian, and just to be very, very frank, what's happening on the inside of Iran is horrible, and and for sure the U.S. sanctions regime has driven a lot of this, but there is it's a hardcore government that's causing immense amount of pain to people who do not align with it religiously.
I guess just the really surreal thing about this moment, though, especially when it comes to Iran and the Iran war, is like how I feel like most people around the world seem to recognize that this has been a complete disaster from the American perspective. You now
Yeah,
seen like you now have American politicians saying like hoping to go back to the status quo from 3 months ago
yeah,
that existed
not going to
before
happen.
they launched this war.
Yeah,
And they just seem to be like just hoping just through pure like American bravado or like tough, rugged masculinity, they can just like pretend that they won this conflict when it seems like most people recognize that isn't the case. Um, it's
yeah.
just been kind of very surreal to see them try and continue to talk about it in this way,
I mean,
despite all evidence to the contrary.
yeah, and let's not forget, Iran did not want this war,
Yeah.
but Iran also had 40 years to prepare for this exact moment, and they are beyond prepared. So much so they at one point said that they are when the U.S. threatened to put soldiers on the ground, they're like, bring them over. They will not return home. They are so prepared, and they have been so strategic. It has been mind-boggling what they've done and how they've done it, knocking out U.S. bases all across the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz, the petrodollar, just really, really gone for the jugular, and which is why the U.S. has zero negotiating position with them right now, and won't have it. This is the end of U.S. dominance in the world, Western dominance in the world, I'd argue.
Yeah, and talking about this discrepancy that we're referring to as well, this idea that Israel can patrol the entire Mediterranean and kidnap and abduct people off the coast of
Yeah,
Greece
great. Yeah,
is like that's okay, but the idea that Iran should maintain some kind of control over their territorial
yeah,
waters there, which was open to everyone prior to the war and is
which
now
was open to
closed.
everyone. Yeah,
But then we're trying to say that that's not okay. And it's just, again,
that's
it's
right.
this is what people see when they look around and they see that there's a set of rules, like in our own society, in international law, there's a set of rules that these Western countries and Israel has, and then there's what everyone else has to abide by. And people, it just seems like a kind of discrepancy that's becoming more and more obvious to everyone
Yeah,
as
yeah,
this
and
drags.
I could not be happier that that's actually the discrepancy that's becoming clear to everyone. We needed the collective wake up. This wake up's going to hurt, but we needed it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if it's makes it somewhat painful to continue filling up our gas tanks, that's not so fun.
Yes.
But maybe this is a long time in the making.
Exactly. Exactly.
I don't know. Before we go,
Yeah.
Gur, I don't want to keep you too much longer. But is there any
This is a fun
other
one.
campaigns or anything that Movement Media Hub is working on that you'd like to let people know about, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think right now it's all flotilla all the time. So just have everyone keep their eyes on, I think to the extent that people can elevate what's happening with the flotilla, that would be hugely helpful because again, the flotilla is existing in a highly suppressed media and social media environment. So to the extent that people can keep an eye on it and share as much as possible, that would be huge. Yeah, but otherwise, thank you for your time and for being so generous with your platform. It's been fun.
Yeah, of course. It's been great to have you on. Thanks for joining, and I will make
Amazing.
sure to share the link for Movement Media Hub. And
Yes,
yeah, appreciate the work that you do as well, Gur. Thanks for joining the show.
amazing. Thanks so much.